გამარჯობა მეგობრებო, დღეს განსაკუთრებული დღეა, რადგან წონის კლებაზე, ჯანმრთელობასა და კიდევ ბევრ სხვა საკითხებზე ვისაუბრებთ დოქტორ ბერისთან ერთად, რომელიც არის ერთ-ერთი წამყვანი სპეციალისტი მსოფლიოში და ერთ-ერთი ყველაზე ცნობილიც. მას აქვს 20 წლიანი გამოცდილება სამედიცინო სფეროში და ამ დროის განმავლობაში 25,000-ზე მეტ პაციენტს უმკურნალა. ასევე ის არის ბესტსელერი წიგნის ავტორი, სახელად ტყუილები, რომლებიც ჩემმა ექიმმა ისაუბრის გარეშე. გადავიდეთ ინტერვიუზე. გამარჯობა დოქტორ ბერი, მადლობა რომ გამონახეთ დრო ინტერვიუსთვის. მე ნამდვილად ვაფასებ ამას.
Thanks so much for having me.
მე ახლა ვთქვი რომ თქვენ გაქვთ 20 წლიანი გამოცდილება და რამდენიმე სიტყვა თქვენი წიგნის შესახებ, რაზეც მოგვიანებით ვისაუბრებთ. მაგრამ მოდით დავიწყოთ თქვენი ისტორიით. პრაქტიკის პირველ წლებში თქვენ იყავით ჩვეულებრივი ექიმი ტრადიციული განათლებით. მაგრამ როდის გააცნობიერეთ რომ რაღაც არასწორი იყო და როგორ გადახვედით დაბალნახშირწყლოვან კეტოგენური ცხოვრების სტილზე?
So I realized that something was wrong when I myself became morbidly obese and pre-diabetic and was developing fatty liver disease. My triglycerides were very high. And so I immediately tried to apply the diets that are recommended for such things, right? I tried to move more and eat less. I tried to follow the American Diabetes Association diet. And I actually gained more weight and my pre-diabetes got even worse following that. And so it was at that point that I realized that I'd been giving bad advice to my patients. And so I had to, first and foremost, I had to figure out what dietary changes, what nutritional improvements to make in my own life, because I was very uncomfortable being a fat, unhealthy doctor whose job it was to inform other people how to lose weight and get healthy. That didn't make a lot of sense. I had to fix me first. And so that's where my journey began.
კი, ნამდვილად შესანიშნავი ისტორიაა. და თუ მეგთხოვთ რომ ჩამოთვალოთ 3 რამ, რაც გასწავლეთ წონას კლებისთვის და 3 რამ, რაც უნდა გააკეთოთ რეალურად, რა იქნებოდა ეს?
Yeah, so the 3 things that I was taught in my very short nutrition class in medical school would be, number 1, eat lots of whole grains. Number 2, avoid all saturated fat. And number 3, jog. And it turns out that all 3 of these things are terrible for weight loss. And they're also terrible for reversing diabetes. And they're also terrible in hundreds of other ways. It's just, it's terrible advice. It's not just meaningless. It's actually bad advice. And so if someone were just coming to this and say, yeah, okay, Dr. Berry, what do I do to get healthy? I would give them 4 steps. Number 1 is to eliminate all sugar from your diet, whether it's added sugar or naturally occurring sugar. Number 2, eliminate all grains from your diet. Wheat, rice, oats, corn, amaranth, millet, quinoa, all that stuff is too high in carbohydrate and causes inflammation. Then step 3 would be to eliminate all vegetable seed oils from your diet. Oils like canola, vegetable oil, soybean oil, peanut oil, sunflower, safflower. All these things are far too high in omega-6 fatty acids and cause inflammation in your body. And then step 4 would be to add lots of fatty meat to your diet, whether that's fatty red meat or whether that's fatty seafood. I don't think it matters. I think that you just need to make sure that the majority of your plate at each meal is covered with some sort of fatty animal meat. And that can include eggs, that can include butter. But those 4 steps will help the majority of people immediately start to burn fat, start to lower their blood sugar, start to lower their levels of insulin and inflammation in their body. And that'll be the beginning of their journey back to good health. And so, I mean, most health experts, their first recommendation would be to eat lots of fruits and vegetables. And since most people don't really like vegetables, they wind up just eating a ton of fruit, which is very high in sugar, fructose, glucose, and others. And so for some people, vegetables can be a significant part of a healthy diet. For other people, there's still too many carbohydrates. I think it depends on where you're from in the world, your genetics, your DNA, perhaps your gut microbiome plays a role. Perhaps there are other things that we don't know about yet, but for the vast majority of people, a low carbohydrate diet is the absolute best diet. I've taken to calling it the proper human diet. And whether that's an all meat diet or whether that's a diet with lots of meat and a little bit of veg, that's for each individual person to experiment with and play around. So I don't think there's any magical phytonutrients or phytochemicals that you can't get just as good or better from eating fatty meat.
ძალიან კარგი. და არის თუ არა რაღაცები, რაც კეტოგენურმა დიეტამ შეცვალა თქვენს ცხოვრებაში. წონის კლების გარდა, რა თქმა უნდა.
Yeah, so I've lost about 70 pounds with the ketogenic way of eating. I had completely reversed my pre-diabetes. I was well on my way to developing type 2 diabetes, which, you know, there are hundreds of millions of people in the world who have type 2 diabetes, and they think that it's a chronic progressive medical condition that they're stuck with for the rest of their life. And that's just not true. You can absolutely reverse your type 2 diabetes by eating a ketogenic diet. My heartburn, my reflux pain, which used to be very, very, very severe back when I was eating the American Diabetes Association diet, and even the paleo diet, got 80% better when I was eating a ketogenic diet. And now eating a carnivore diet, it's completely gone. The daily joint pain and stiffness that I thought was just part of being in my late 30s is now I'm 51 years old now, and I have less joint pain now than when I was in my 30s eating the old diet. So many things like that. I have rosacea, but you can't tell it. As long as I'm eating keto carnivore, there's no evidence of it. But if I went back to eating all the wheat and the rice and the oats and the sugars, my rosacea would flare up and I would have these red cheeks and red nose. Just any number of things like that have improved for me personally, but they've also improved for hundreds of thousands of people who have given the ketogenic way of eating a try.
რა სიტყვით ვაშლის მარზე? ბევრი ადამიანი იყენებს გულძმარვისთვის.
Yeah, and it does work temporarily. And back when I had severe heartburn reflux, I had a bottle of apple cider vinegar sitting in my office at the clinic. And I hated the taste of it, still do, but I would take a big swig of it and it would make the heartburn go away for a few minutes or a few hours. But that's not addressing the root cause, right? That's a temporary fix. And I think I would much rather someone use apple cider vinegar than to take a daily acid blocker in pill form. I think it's much safer to do that. But most people want to fix the underlying problem, the root problem. And that's what a keto diet or a carnivore diet does, is they just fix the inflammation and fix the hyperinsulinemia. Then my body was able to just heal. And now I haven't taken anything for heartburn in 2 years. And before, when I was eating the old diet, I had to take 2 Nexium, which is a strong prescription strength pill for heartburn reflux. I had to take 2 every day, every single day, or I would just have severe pain. And I haven't taken even just an over-the-counter pill for heartburn in over 2 years.
დიახ, და არის რაღაცები, რასაც როცა ჭამპურს, ბურღულეულს და მსგავს საკვებს, შენ ფიქრობ, რომ ასეთი რაღაცები ნორმალურია. მაგრამ კეტოგენური დიეტის დაწყების შემდეგ იწყება ცვლილებები. მაგალითად, მე მქონდა საკმაოდ კარგი მეხსიერება და ზოგადი კოგნიტური ფუნქციები კეტო დიეტის დაწყებამდე. მაგრამ შემდეგ დავიწყე კეტოგენური დიეტა და ერთ დღესაც დაახლოებით 6 თვის შემდეგ მე გავიაზრე, რომ ჩემი ტვინი მუშაობდა ისე, როგორც არასდროს და მე გავიაზრე, რომ მაგალითად გონების დაბინდვა და ასეთი რაღაცები საერთოდ არ არის ნორმალური.
Yeah, a lot of the inflammation from an inappropriate human diet acts on your brain. There's no doubt about that. And tens of thousands of people have reported increased mental clarity with keto, improved memory. Many people who are in the early stages of Alzheimer's dementia have noticed a vast improvement when they really cut the carbohydrates and the vegetable oils out and eat a ketogenic or a carnivore diet. It slows down the progression of Alzheimer's and other dementias almost to a complete stop.
დიახ, ნამდვილად. და რა სიტყვით ბურღულეულზე? ეს საკმაოდ მნიშვნელოვანი საკითხია ადამიანებისთვის. რადგან შეიძლება ვინმე ვიცოდეს, რომ შაქარი სუდია, მაგრამ ბევრმა შეიძლება თქვას, რომ ბურღულეულს აქვს რთული ნახშირწყლები და რომ შვრია არის სასწაული კანისთვის, ასევე თუნდაც ქოლესტერინისთვის. მათ შეიძლება გაჩვენონ კიდეც რამდენიმე კვლევა ამ საკითხზე. რა შეგიძლიათ უთხრათ ამ ადამიანებს?
Well, the problem with grains are twofold. Number one, grains are very high in starch. And starches are just long chains of sugar molecules stuck together. That's what starch is. And the moment you start to chew up wheat, rice, oats, or corn, the starch starts to break down immediately in your mouth. before you even swallow it. And so it's basically pure sugar by the time it gets to your bloodstream. That's the first problem. So any grain is a high carbohydrate food. The second problem is that all grains, which are plant seeds, have chemicals in them to try to prevent other animals from eating their seeds. And we've all heard of gluten and gliadin and wheat, but each different grain, each different seed has a specific phytochemical toxin. That's right. And even corn has zein in it that is inflammatory in nature. And so all grains are very inflammatory. Now, some people, if they're gluten sensitive and they eat some wheat, they notice they have immediate symptoms, right? And it's very clear to them they shouldn't eat that. But other people have very vague symptoms. They'll just have knee joint pain, or they'll have a flare-up of a skin condition. And a lot of people don't make the connection, oh, it's from eating the grains. That's what's causing that. A lot of people have bloating and gas, or they'll have diarrhea or constipation, and they don't put one together and say, oh, it's the grains causing that. But only after you've eliminated all the grains are you able to look back and go, man, I used to be miserable, but now I'm not miserable anymore. And I think that's part of the reason that the ketogenic way of eating is so popular, is that people feel so much better when they're avoiding those things. And I compare sugar, grains, and vegetable oils to slow poisons. They don't kill you today. They're not going to kill you this week or next month, but they chronically inflame your body. They're doing chronic little microscopic amounts of damage, and that builds up over the years into symptoms, but ultimately into disease.
Why these myths exist?
Well, I think the myths exist for multiple reasons. Probably the most common reason is people just have never heard of this before. And that's why I've started calling this way of eating the proper human diet, because that sounds much less weird and faddish and sciencey than a ketogenic diet. That sounds right off the bat, it sounds like something unusual and weird, right? Like ketogenic. But if you say, what diet are you eating? You say, I'm eating the proper human diet. People are like, oh, well, that sounds like it makes sense. It sounds very healthy and natural. And so, but if you look back at the paleoanthropological evidence, we were eating a very low carbohydrate diet full of fatty meat. Fatty meat was the thing that we went for first. If we were starving to death, we might eat some veg. But if we had our choice, if we were successful on the hunt, we fed the entire tribe with fatty meat. And so I think that then ultimately, I think a lot of these myths, especially the myths that you read in the newspaper and in magazines and you see on news channels, are coming from the big pharmaceutical industries and the big food manufacturers. They know that their profits are going to suffer if the keto way of life continues to become more popular. And so they've put out articles in unison that they've actually had big marketing firms come up with this article. You may have read the article about bad breath, and all these things are coming from marketing companies paid by the big food and big pharmaceutical manufacturers to try to put a bad light on keto, because they don't want everybody to eat keto, because they'll lose billions of dollars if everybody starts to eat the proper human diet.
იმიტომ რომ მე და თქვენ ვამბობთ რომ ბურღულეული ხილი და დონატები და ასე შემდეგ არის ცუდი და ეს არის რაღაცები რაც იწვევს სიმსუქნეს, დიაბეტს და დაავადებების უმეტესობას ამ პლანეტაზე. მაგრამ სოფლიოს მეორე ნაწილი ექიმების ჩათვლით ამბობენ სრულიად საპირისპირო რაღაცებს. როგორ უნდა გადაწყვიტოს ჯორჯმა რომელია სიმართლე, თუ მან არ იცის არაფერი ბიოქიმიაზე და არ შეუძლია კვლევების კითხვა.
Yeah. So what George should look for is evidence. And so for most people, they see their friends and family, and they see them every day, and you know what your friends and family look like. And when you have a family member or a friend start the keto diet or the carnivore diet, and they lose all this weight, and not only do they lose weight, but their mental acuity gets better, their skin clears up, they're nicer, they're less irritable, you can tell they're not in pain anymore. I think George is going to put a lot of stock in that evidence and say, wow, look at Jerry over here. Jerry used to be a fat, miserable loser, And now Jerry is going to the gym. Jerry's got a new girlfriend. Jerry's doing all these other things. I want to be like Jerry. And I think for most people, that's why the word of mouth way of this spreading is so powerful, is because you see your mailman, you see the cook at the restaurant, you see all these people who look like they've been transformed. And you say, man, you look great. What are you doing? And that's when they say, I'm doing keto or I'm doing carnivore. And it's hard to unsee that when you see your friend who you've known for 20 years, who's always been a fat ass, and now all of a sudden here's your friend that looks great and feels great. That's very compelling to the average person. And then that's why I make YouTube videos, and all my friends and colleagues, that's why we're on social media all the time trying to give George the research. So when George sees his friend transform his health with keto, and then he starts it and he's losing weight, his blood markers are getting better, but then he goes to his doctor or he goes to his dietitian and they say, whoa, stop keto immediately. It's very dangerous. Then George is going to start looking on YouTube and other places for evidence. Is it really dangerous? And that's why I make all my YouTube videos with the research links in the show notes. It's so George can actually go and open up one of these studies that shows that keto is not dangerous. It's very safe. And then George can even print out a copy of that study to take back to his doctor or dietitian and say, hey, look, I found this study. Keto's not dangerous. It's actually part of the proper human diet. Why did you say that?
რა სიტყვით დიაბეტზე და რა აზრის ხართ ამ საკითხზე? შეუძლია კეტოგენურ დიეტას რეალურად შეაბრუნოს და განკურნოს დიაბეტი? იმედოვნებ თქვენ გესმით, რომ ეს ადამიანები ებრძვიან დიაბეტს წლების განმავლობაში და პროცესში დახარჯული აქვთ ათასობით დოლარი. და ახლა ჩვენ ვამბობთ, რომ პასუხი არის კეტოგენური დიეტა და თანაც ეს უფასოა. მუშაობთ რეალურად კეტოგენური დიეტა და თუ ყავთ პაციენტები, რომლებმაც განკურნეს დიაბეტი კეტოგენური დიეტით?
Yeah, first of all, I've reversed my own pre-diabetes, and I have had hundreds of patients completely reverse their type 2 diabetes. Now, if someone has type 1 diabetes, or if they have latent adult onset diabetes caused by autoimmunity, they're not going to be able to reverse that with keto, but they can improve it. If a type 1 diabetic eats a ketogenic diet, they will have a normal A1C. So in other words, their blood sugar and all the markers of diabetes will go back to normal as long as they're eating a ketogenic diet. But for someone with type 2 diabetes, it absolutely will reverse that. I've not yet seen a case that wouldn't reverse if that person ate a low enough carbohydrate diet. And I've taken to calling type 2 diabetes carbohydrate overdose syndrome, because that's literally what it is. It's not even a true diabetes. It's just a person who's been poisoning their physiology with too many carbohydrates. And when they stop the carbohydrate overdose, then the toxicity goes away, and their blood sugar and their hemoglobin A1C and their insulin level, they all go back to normal. And that's the definition of reversing type 2 diabetes, isn't it?
დიახ, და შეგიძლიათ თქვა დაახლოებით რამდენი დრო შეიძლება დაჭირდეს დიაბეტის ან ინსულინის რეზისტენტულობის განკურნებას?
Yeah, it depends on how severe your type 2 diabetes is, and it depends on how long you've had it. Some people can reverse their type 2 diabetes within a month of eating a very low carbohydrate ketogenic diet. For other people, it'll take several months or maybe even a year. And it depends very much on how many total carbohydrates you're eating a day. Some people think a ketogenic diet is eating up to 100 total grams of carbohydrates a day. For someone like that, they're still going to improve their diabetes, but it might take a lot longer period of time. Whereas if someone decreases their carbohydrate intake down to 50 grams a day, they're going to have faster success. Where people notice the most fast success reversing their type 2 diabetes is when they eat 20 total grams of carbohydrate or less a day. That works very, very quickly.
როცა საუბარია წონის კლებაზე, როცა საუბარია დიაბეტის განკურნებაზე, ან ნებისმიერი სხვა ასოცირებული დაავადების, როგორც არის ინსულტი ან რაიმე სხვა, გინახავთ თუ არა რაიმე თუნდაც მცირედით ისეთივე ეფექტური, როგორც არის კეტოგენური დიეტა?
No, never. And so first of all, I've never seen any diet have the results that a ketogenic or a carnivore diet have. And I've recommended many diets. I've recommended the American Diabetes Association diet back before I knew better. I recommended the American Heart Association diet. I recommended a diet that looked just like the Eat Lancet diet, that's super high in carbs and super low in protein and saturated fat. I recommended Weight Watchers. I recommended Jenny Craig, all the diets out there that are basically semi-starvation diets. And I noticed that maybe one patient out of 100 would have a little bit of success for a while, then they'd fall off the wagon and gain back all the weight, and their diabetes would get worse. So first of all, no diet compares to a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet. Secondly, there's no prescription medication that I've ever seen or prescribed that has the effects of a ketogenic diet. Some of the very strong medications for diabetes, they will lower your blood sugar and lower your hemoglobin A1C. There's no doubt about that. But all the other things that keto does, so that diabetic pill was never going to help your heartburn. That diabetic pill is never going to help your rosacea or your eczema or your psoriasis. That diabetes pill is never going to help your knee arthritis or your hip pain or your gut problems, your irritable bowel. It's never going to help any of those things. And so the ketogenic diet is almost like taking 20 prescription strength pills with no side effects. It really just blows every diet and blows every prescription medication and over-the-counter medication. It just blows them away. Nothing works like keto.
დიახ, საოცარია ნამდვილად. და არის თუ არა კეტოგენური დიეტა, არა მხოლოდ წონის კლების დიეტა, არამედ რეალურად ადამიანისთვის ოპტიმალური და შესაბამისი კვების სტილი. და რატომ?
Yeah, it is a health optimization diet because virtually all of the diseases of modern society are caused by two things. They're caused by carbohydrate overdose, or they're caused by chronic inappropriate inflammation. And so the ketogenic diet removes all of the slow poisons that would either cause you to have blood sugar spikes, insulin spikes, or chronic inappropriate inflammation. And so when you remove those three things, all of the diseases of modern society get better, if not go completely into remission. So that's pretty powerful.
რა უნდა გავაკეთოთ უმინდა რომ მოვიმატო წონაში? ეს არის კითხვა, რომელსაც საკმაოდ ხშირად ვიღებ.
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, the ketogenic diet is not a weight loss diet. It is a weight optimization diet. You have to understand that because it's the proper human diet. And so if you're overweight, if you're obese, you're going to tend to naturally lose weight on keto. But if you're underweight, you're going to naturally tend to gain weight on keto. And many people notice that they just put on a little bit of extra muscle when they're eating keto and definitely when they're eating a carnivore diet. They just tend to hold more muscle naturally, even without working out. Now, if you want to really bulk up and be very muscular, you're going to have to lift weights. You're going to have to eat lots of fat and protein, and you're going to have to lift heavy weights if you want to put on more than the natural amount of muscle. Then finally, if you just want to gain weight and you don't care what it is, whether it's fat or muscle, just eat more carbohydrates. I guarantee you'll gain fat if you eat more carbohydrates. And so if somebody's on a ketogenic diet and they're eating very low carb and they just want to put some fat on for the winter, say, if they think that the food transportation is going to be interrupted and there might not be food for the winter, then I would encourage you to put on 10 or 15 pounds of fat for the winter. And the way to do that is to eat a high carbohydrate diet because that mimics what our ancestors used to do. When the winter was coming, they would eat all the fruit, all the berries. They would eat as many carbohydrates as they could stuff in their mouth so they could gain fat for the winter. And so if you want to gain fat, eat more carbs. If you want to gain muscle, eat lots of protein and fat and lift heavy weights. But don't think of keto as a weight loss diet. It's a weight optimization diet.
დიახ, მაგრამ ნახშირწყლების ჭამა ჯანსაღია? და რა სიტყვით ანთებით პროცესებზე და არა მხოლოდ.
Yeah, so I don't think eating carbs occasionally is a big deal. I think our ancestors 100,000 years ago, if they found a honey tree, they endured the stings and they ate all the honey they could get their hands on, right? I think when the berries were ripe, they ate all the berries. I don't think that eating carbohydrates is necessarily an acutely toxic thing to do. But the problem comes in our modern society when we're eating a high carbohydrate diet every day of the week, all year long. That's the problem. And so our ancestors had access to a high carbohydrate diet maybe 1 month out of the 12-month year. And so they never had an opportunity to eat high carb every day. It was impossible back then. What they ate on a daily basis was fatty meat, was bone marrow, was brains, was things like that. And so, but when the fruit was ripe, they absolutely ate it. And so if people want to follow a seasonal diet like that, keeping in mind you're probably going to gain 5 or 10 pounds if you do eat lots of berries and fruit in the fall and in autumn. But I don't want to gain weight. I don't want to hold an extra 10 or 15 pounds. So that's why I keep my carbohydrate intake low every single day of the year.
დასიტყვით ქალებზე შეუძლიათ იყვნენ კეტოგენურ დიეტაზე ორსულობის ან ლაქტაციის პერიოდში?
100%, yeah. We have a 12-month-old baby boy, and during my wife's entire pregnancy, she ate keto, very, very low carb. Then he's been breastfed for 12 months, and she ate exclusively a ketogenic, low carb, almost a carnivore diet. And so first of all, there's no research that shows that you have to have carbohydrates when you're trying to get pregnant or when you are pregnant or when you're breastfeeding. There's no research to show that. And secondly, let's use our common sense and think back to the paleoanthropological evidence. 100,000 years ago, there were women, right? There were half men, half women. And those women had babies, didn't they? They had to have babies or we'd be extinct. Did they breastfeed? 100% they breastfed. They did all that on a fatty meat diet that had very little carbohydrate in it. And we know that they were successful or we wouldn't be here, would we? Because they're our ancestors. If they had died out, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation because our species would be extinct. And so anytime someone says, oh, you've got to have, grains or fruit or whatever, if you're trying to get pregnant or if you are pregnant or if you're breastfeeding, that just reveals that they don't know what they're talking about.
დიახ, რა თქმა უნდა. და ფიქრობთ, რომ კეტოგენური ცხოვრების სტილი არის უსაფრთხო და ჯანსაღი ბავშვებისთვის. რას ეტყოდით მშობლებს?
100%. The highest carbohydrate food our 12-month-old baby has ever eaten is avocado, pickles, and olives. That's literally the only carbohydrates he's ever had. He lives and he's still breastfeeding, but anytime he does eat food, he eats eggs, he eats meat, he eats beef ribs, pork ribs, he eats brisket. And so he is what we call a ketovore. So he's almost completely carnivore, but he eats a little bit of veg here and there. But even when he eats the veg, it's a very low carbohydrate vegetable.
შესანიშნავია და დაბალნახევარწლოვანი დიეტა და კეტოგენური ცხოვრების სტილი არის საკმაოდ ახალი საქართველოსთვის ამერიკასთან შედარებით. და ყოველთვის როცა ვეუბნები ვინმეს რომ ნახშირწყლები იწვევს სიმზუქნეს, ადამიანები ყოველთვის მისვამენ ამ კითხვას. თუ ეს სიმართლეა, მაშინ რატომ არიან აზიელები ასეთი გამხდრები? მე მაქვს პასუხი ამ კითხვაზე, რა თქმა უნდა, თუმცა ვფიქრობ, რომ თქვენ უკეთესად უპასუხებთ.
Yeah, so and that's two separate questions. So your people in Georgia say, well, if carbs make you fat and diabetic, what about the Asians? Well, here's the thing. There's two things to think about here. First of all, the Asians have much different genetics than people from Georgia or people from the Nordic countries. And the predominance of my DNA is Nordic, Scotch, Irish, and I have a lot of Neanderthal DNA. And so some groups of people, and it's mainly Asians and Indians, they have a very low personal fat threshold. It's very hard for them to get fat. They can eat a high carbohydrate diet, and on the outside, they don't look fat. But it's very easy for them to develop fatty liver disease and fatty pancreas disease. And type 2 diabetes is epidemic in the Asian countries and in the Indian countries. And so what you have, we call it TOFI, which means thin on the outside and fat on the inside. So they don't hold fat like you would or like I would if we ate a high carbohydrate diet. They don't get fat like that. They get fat on the inside. And so you'll see an Asian or an Indian, and they'll be very slender, but they'll have a little belly pooch. And if you check their blood, which is often not done because they're so slender, you think, well, they can't have diabetes. I'm not even going to check their blood work. It's very common for them to be pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic and have hyperinsulinemia and have fatty liver and it be completely undiagnosed. And indeed, the Asian and Indian continents are waking up to this, and they're starting to check all their population. And indeed, type 2 diabetes is epidemic in Asian countries from eating the high carbohydrate diet. So people from more northern Caucasian centers, we get fat on the outside. But people from Asia and India, they don't necessarily get fat on the outside like we do. They get fat on the inside, and they develop prediabetes and type 2 diabetes very early in life, but no one knows it because they're so slender, they look healthy, right? And they're not healthy. They're very unhealthy metabolically, but they're still slender. Absolutely, yeah. And it's very confusing for people if they don't understand the physiology and the medicine behind this. They just see skinny and that equals healthy. But that's absolutely not the case at all. Being obese is always unhealthy. There's no argument about that. But being slender is not always a sign of good health.
რას ფიქრობთ კალორიებზე? უნდა მივაქციოთ ყურადღება კალორიებს, როცა წონეს დაკლება გვინდა.
Most people on a ketogenic diet don't pay attention to calories at all. They don't count calories, they don't track calories, they don't measure calories. They don't try to be in a caloric deficit. None of that stuff is necessary if you're eating the proper human diet. Just like wild animals, they don't have calorie counters on their phone, right? Like the water buffalo and the lion and reindeer, they don't have calorie calculators on their iPhone, do they? They eat. And so here's what they do: if they're hungry, they eat. When they get full, they stop eating. And what they do eat is a species appropriate diet. So the reindeer will eat the proper reindeer diet. And by doing that, that reindeer can listen to the hormones of hunger and the hormones of satiety. That reindeer never has to count calories or anything else for that matter. The lion in the wild, the rhinoceros in the wild, they have a perfect body weight, but they never track calories. And so my contention is that if a human being is eating the proper human diet, we can also listen to our hunger hormones and eat when we're hungry. And then we can listen to our satiety hormones. And when we get full, we stop eating. And then we don't eat again until we are again hungry. When you follow that model that's repeated in nature a million times, you get the right results if you're eating the proper human diet.
So do you know Ითრობ თუ ინვეს ვინც არის კეტოგენურ დიეტაზე და ქონდა სერიოზული პრობლემები არაიმე მსგავსი კორონავირუსისგან? From coronavirus?
No, I know of 3 people in the ketogenic community who did catch coronavirus. And for all 3 of them, it was just like a bad cold or like catching the flu. They had it for a week or 2, then they got over it, and now they're totally back to normal. It's only in people who are metabolically unhealthy. And I think the mainstream media is even admitting that as well, that it's people with diabetes, people who are morbidly obese, people who have fatty liver, have underlying heart conditions, underlying lung conditions. These are the people who might get very, very sick and perhaps even die from coronavirus. But if you don't have any of those conditions and you're eating a proper human diet so that your blood sugar is low normal, your insulin's low normal, and you don't have any chronic inappropriate inflammation, the chances of you having a serious bout of coronavirus are almost zero.
თქვენ გაქვთ დაწერილი წიგნის სახელად ტყუილები, რომლებიც ჩემმა ექიმმა მითხრა. და პირველ ყოვლისა ეს არის ერთ-ერთი საუკეთესო სათაური, რაც კი მსმენია. So great.
Thank you.
და მე დარწმუნებული ვარ, რომ ბევრმა ადამიანმა ჰკითხათ უკვე, მაგრამ რატომ შეარჩიეთ ასეთი სახელი წიგნისთვის?
Yeah, I chose that name because the publisher actually wanted me to call it medical myths. And the problem with that I had is that doctors and dietitians and other healthcare providers, they have what's called a fiduciary duty to their patients, which means it's actually a legal, moral duty to not only give advice, but to give good advice. That's our job. You don't go to your doctor so they can give you bad advice. It's understood in society that lawyers, attorneys, doctors, other healthcare providers, other professionals, they are held to a higher level, right? And it should be that way. And so that's what makes the things I talk about in the book, they're not medical myths. because it's a doctor's job to damn well know better than to be repeating some bullshit myth that they heard on television last night. That's not a doctor's job. A doctor's job is to be a lifelong student, a lifelong learner, to be a lifelong questioner, and never to blindly accept anything that the American Diabetes Association says or any other regulatory body. It's your job as a doctor, as a professional, to do the research, to put in your due diligence, and to know what you're talking about. And if you don't do that, if you just repeat what you read in some journal, then that's more than just a medical myth. That's more than a misstatement. That's more than a mistake. That's a lie.
დიახ, რა თქმა უნდა. ფიქრობთ, რომ ექიმებს უბრალოდ არ ესმით კეტოგენური დიეტის ზალა, წონისკლების, ზოგადი ჯანმრთელობის, დიაბეტის ან სხვა დაავადებების განკურნების მიმართულებით. თუ უბრალოდ აიგნორებენ ყველაფერს ამის შესახებ, რადგან ეს არ არის ის, რაც მათ ისწავლეს 20 ან 40 წლის წინ.
Well, it's all three of those. It's nothing that they were ever taught, so therefore it's immediately suspect because it feels new to them. Even though it's actually the oldest diet that humanity's ever eaten, it feels new to them. It feels like a fad diet to them. Secondly, they never hear anything good about the ketogenic diet come from their regulatory body, whatever specialty they happen to practice. They never read in their medical journals about how powerful a ketogenic diet is. And so they don't get that feedback as well. And then when they talk to their colleagues in the doctor's lounge or on the golf course or wherever, none of their doctor friends are saying, man, keto's awesome. And so it's almost like they're in this protected bubble where they don't get the feedback that you and I would get from social media of all these hundreds of thousands of people saying, oh my God, keto changed my life. But I think you'll notice, and I've been noticing there are many more healthcare providers who are starting to talk about keto. And because they've had all their patients come to them, and all their patients are saying, hey, I'm on keto, I've lost 50 pounds. And as a doctor, after, if one person tells you that, they're just a kook, right? You're like, oh, whatever, George, I'm not believing you. But when you have had 100 patients come to you and say, oh my God, keto is the best thing ever, you're an idiot if you don't at least look into that, right? And when a doctor or other healthcare provider, when they actually start to diligently research keto, they do find research. Lots of research, actually, that's been done over the years, but it hasn't been widely publicized. It hasn't been widely published, and so you have to go searching for it. But that's the last straw for many doctors they may be doing keto themselves, but they never say it out loud, because they're afraid that their doctor colleagues will laugh at them or that their patients will sue them. But when they start really digging into the research and they find all this research that shows that keto is not only very safe and very healthy, it may actually be the proper human diet, that's when they have the courage to start telling their sick patients, hey, you should try keto. And there are more and more healthcare providers coming online with keto, and I think you'll continue to see that trend progress. Takes time. Yeah.
და ჩემი ბოლო კითხვა არ იქნება მედიცინაზე ან წონის კლებაზე. მე მაინტერესებს რა იცით ჩემი ქვეყნის საქართველოს შესახებ.
I don't know much about Georgia. I think it used to be part of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
I know it's at a pretty northern latitude. And that's another thing I would ask George is, George, what do you think people ate in Georgia in November, December, January, and February? What do you think they ate? Because there ain't no damn vegetables growing then. You ate caribou and rainbow and polar bear. You ate fatty meat. That's what you ate back then. But that's about all I know. I would love to visit one day. Maybe after this virus dies down and all the powers that be calm down, we can come do a keto conference in Georgia.
დიახ, ნამდვილად უნდა ჩამოხვიდეთ. და მე მინდა საჯაროდ დაგვადიჟოთ საქართველოში. ეს ნამდვილად ლამაზი ქვეყანაა და ჩვენ შეიძლება კიდევ ერთი ვიდეოც კი გადავიღოთ.
Hey, yeah, absolutely. Just let me know.
შესანიშნავია. ასე რომ მადლობა თქვენი დროისთვის და მე ვფიქრობ, რომ საკმაოდ საინტერესო ინტერვიუ გამოვიდა. რა სიტყვით?
I love it. It was a pleasure, and I thank you so much for the honor of inviting me.
არა, ეს პატივი იყო ჩემთვის. შემდეგ შეხვედრამდე.
All right, see you later.